Welcome, everybody, to the Educators Room. We are here for our final talk on the anti-racist series. And today, we're going to talk about administrators and how we take the anti-racist lens and leading the change. So we have some wonderful guests. You've seen them before. If you've been here during the week, we have Cassandra Washington, Linda Darcy, and I just messed up your name, Rolandria Justice. So take a second, guys, and introduce yourself and your experience in administration. Anybody can go.
Okay, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Cassandra Washington, and I am a former principal with Chicago Public Schools. I started out as a teacher, then went on to be an assistant principal and a principal, and I'm retired now, doing some work with City Year as an instructional coach.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Linda Darcy. I am currently an education specialist, which is kind of like a consultant in the areas of equity trainings and English learner strategies. I used to be a central office administrator for a school district. I was the director of human capital development.
Mm-hmm.
I am Rolandria Justice. I'm a former teacher from Newark, New Jersey, and former assistant principal and then founding principal of a charter school in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And currently I am a consultant working in schools in Detroit. And I am so happy to be here.
Thank you, guys. So, we've been talking about anti-racism, and we've talked about everything from around the curriculum to around what does anti-racist mean. I mean, just so many topics. And I feel like the missing piece for a lot of these topics will be leadership. So we had this conversation off camera, but it's something that I want us to kind of talk about. What is it? And guys, I'm sorry, in the chat, put where you're from. Tell us where you're from. Tell us where you're at. But I want us to talk about what can you guys think of an experience of when you were in leadership that made you say, oh my God, I have to confront racism? Or did you not have that experience?
I mean, my experiences are obviously not as personal, being part of the white majority, especially here in Connecticut. But when I first went to a district, and they have a district data team, and they would meet and they would look at all of the testing data, and they would look at the disciplinary data, but they never disaggregated for race. And so the scores weren't bad. The scores weren't bad until you disaggregate them and you see that, just like every place else in Connecticut, it's a huge gap between the scores for kids of color and white students. And the fact that they had never done that before, right, is just really an example of white supremacy, right? We're just taking the white norm, and there's among some people, not necessarily the leadership, but kind of the idea that, well, the kids of color aren't in our town, they're coming in from Hartford anyway, so we do the best we can.
I worked for a charter organization, and I had been working for a month before we ever had any kind of big, wider organization-wide events. And so during that month, I had been, going and visiting with the incoming families, meeting with the kids, talking with them, doing all of these things to try and build relationships, get to know them. And when I had our first kind of company-wide thing where the founder of the organization spoke to the group, there were a lot of things in what was being said that didn't sit well with me. It was a lot of kind of like that, the white savior kind of attitude. And I was like, it didn't sit well with me, not only because I am a Black woman, but in addition, I just met all of these families coming in and they didn't seem like they needed us to save them. And so after having that experience sitting in that, I immediately went to my principal and was like, I don't think that this is the organization for me. Because if that is who is leading us, then this doesn't sit well with me. And I remember this to this day. He said, look, you and I, we work together, I will deal with that. I'm like, okay, because I don't want to leave the kids, in the lurch, but still, it didn't sit well with me, where you're sitting there and that your spirit is just not feeling well about what's being said about the people that you're going to be working with.
Mm. Wow.
And then also sometimes I know what I've seen where they would not have the expectations for our students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, oh, they can't do that. They can't learn. And that would make me so angry. Maybe you're not teaching them the way that they can learn.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not matching their learning style.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're in a certain zip code does not mean that they are going to be stuck in limbo for the rest of their lives. So maybe we need to meet them where they are and recognize that one size does not fit all. And that's what I found a lot in my district, is that they had these one size fit all solutions. And it just didn't sit well with me at all. And I got in trouble a few times, but such is life.
Yeah.
Gloria Ladson Billings calls it the "you poor dear" syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah. You got into good troubles, Cassandra. Good
troubles. Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I get, as we're talking about this tonight, because I think a lot of conversation is had around what teachers must do. But in all of the talks that we've had, after thousands of comments, one thing that consistently came up was, what do I do if my leader does not believe in this? Like, if my leader is not being anti-racist, they are not requiring teachers to confront things and talk about things and make it, an environment that wants to discuss these things, what do I do? And I've thought about that, and I thought, what are some of the things, like, what are some of the things that hinders administrators from really going to the gut and talking about race and having those conversations? For me, I've noticed that it is many times, if the leader doesn't believe it to be a problem, it's not a problem. What have you guys seen with this?
I think a lot of times I did recognize it and spoke up on it, but then didn't necessarily get support from the district level on it. They kind of brush it under the rug in some situations. But if it was in-house in my own school, then I dealt with it.
Yeah. But Cassandra, how do you, because you were an assistant principal, how did you get the courage to say, we won't do this in my school? These are the expectations, or to even confront certain things, because some principals, some administrators, they're dealing with, I don't want to lose my job. So if I don't want to lose my job, I can't do that.
I think that's what has to happen, though. The fear of losing your job has to be less than the fear of, can I look at myself in the mirror knowing that this is what's happening? And I think that for me, once I got over that fear of, okay, well, even if I do lose my job, does that mean I won't be able to find something else, right? Yeah. Once I get over that, then it's like, okay, well, I am going to speak up, because what's the worst thing you're going to do to me?
Lose my job and I can find another one, right?
I'll be okay, right? But for me personally, it wasn't until I had that confidence and I felt that I can do this, and I'm going to do this, because I have to go home at the end of the night and look at myself in the mirror. And if I don't like who I see, if I don't like what's looking back at me, then I can't do this, because it's not going to sit well.
Yeah. And, one of the things that, for us, like, you're a courageous person, like, you have these conversations, but what if and I guess for me, I don't understand the fear, because I'm like you, I'm like, guess what? I can get another job. It's not a problem. And I've had that, because I think when you operate in fear, you never get over it. Right. But what was it? Was there any one? My dog just went over. I was like, whoa. Is there any one thing that happened that you said, nope, I will find another job, and that is what it is?
That incident I spoke about, that was mine, because it was just, I'm sitting there and hearing things that, again, just did not match what I just experienced. And what I was saying to myself is, if those families that I had in that month grown to love were going to be coming into this, then what is their experience going to be? Right? Like what is their experience going to be, and how much is that going to eat at their souls? And I think that that's one of the things that really, it's really become personal for me, because I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. I grew up in Germany and Louisiana and all these places where I felt things and experienced things that ate at my soul and ate at my confidence. And it wasn't until I got out of that and realized, oh, wait, all of those little microaggressions and all of those little policies that were bent at making sure that I felt different and felt substandard and felt like I was not good enough. Oh, that wasn't me. Oh, okay. So now that I understand that, now I am going to speak up, right? Yeah. Because now I realize that wasn't me. Not all of it, you know. Of course, I've grown over the years, but not all of it was me.
Right.
But I do think that, like, if I think of, you know, the vast majority of administrators, certainly in Connecticut, and I imagine nationwide, are white male, right? Mm-hmm. And so they haven't had that personal experience of being the other and understanding how violent microaggressions can be and how disheartening and they, you know, I say all the time how a culture's job is to replicate itself, right? So they are not willing to lose their job, and so nobody taught them and us white people how to talk about race. And don't get me wrong, we need to go out and figure it out, but so many people don't. So like there's a real fear of saying something wrong, the fear of being called a racist, even if that's what your behavior is. Like it doesn't surprise me that the people who don't understand what it's like to be an other aren't willing to lose their job for sacrifice for this unreal culture and climate.
Wow. And I think you brought up something that's really important, the demographics of our leadership, right? If you haven't experienced it, it is very hard for you to empathize with it, or if you've been taught about race. Now, as a Black woman, I wasn't taught about race, but I experienced it. So it shaped what I did. But how do you teach principals, school leaders, how do you teach them about race? Like, how do you, if you're coming from an area where it's not discussed, we don't talk about it, how do you then discuss it or learn about it? I'm sorry. How do you learn about it in order to discuss it?
Well, I think it depends on your experience too, growing up, and how race was addressed with you. I mean, for me, my mom grew up in the segregated South. And she talked about it all the time before she moved, you know, to Chicago, and things that she had to go through as a child. But she was also very, she made sure that we learned about it, we read about it, she bought books and things like that. For those who, if you're teaching your staff, I mean, it's difficult, but I wouldn't say force feed them, even though you want to force feed them, but you have to be purposeful about professional development. And even in my school, there were so many different cultures and so many different ethnic groups that there was a lot for us to learn. Because we had Black children coming from all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, it just wasn't the United States. It was the Caribbean, it was Africa, it was South America, and then other races. But we had to be very conscious about teaching it. As an administrator, my assistant principal and I made sure that it was a part of our professional development. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy at all.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point, because many times we discuss Black and white, but we don't discuss the cultural differences of kids coming from other countries. I once worked at a high school where it was majority African American, and we started to get lots of students who were from different countries in Africa. And many of our students were Muslim. And so we had to have a moment where we got staff together to understand that students may want to go pray during the day, and we had to let them do that. And it was very difficult for some of our teachers, and they were just used to looking at Black, white, not looking at different cultures and what that entails also.
Yeah.
I think you have to have oh, sorry, Linda.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think you have to have a listening stance, right? And like be willing to listen to what people are saying and experiencing. I mean, I've experienced as a Black woman, right? But as a principal, I had a student who was transgender. And so I didn't have any experience with that. So I had to learn, I had to listen, I had to ask questions and let that student and his family know, like, we're going to figure this out. Right. So even if I make a mistake and accidentally call you by the wrong pronoun, like just know it is not intentional and we're going to figure this out together. So I think that that's the first thing that a leader needs to have is a learning stance and understand I don't know everything about everything. Right. But it is also important that you feel like this is a part of your school. You are a part of the school community too.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we need to, like, what you described is we need to be willing to be taught and accept that correction. Like I'll make mistakes and people will correct me and teach me. And I have to accept that, right? With humility and grace. And that is not something that some people are good at. They all of a sudden get really defensive. And it's like, we all are going to make these mistakes, but you got to try, you got to talk about it, because otherwise you're never going to make those mistakes to learn now how you do it the next time.
And Rolandra, I like what you said, a listening stance. What is that? And how do leaders develop that?
I mean, I feel like you go into the conversation with that, not with what am I going to say, but truly listening to what the other person has to say. And if I go into the conversation with that kind of stance, and instead of me constantly talking, I'm going to ask questions, right? I'm going to say, well, what is your experience here? What can we do as a school? How can I, as a leader, make you feel more valued and heard and blah, blah, blah. So you're going into the conversation, not with here. I already know what I'm going to say. I already know how I'm going to defend myself. Right. As soon as she says anything that makes me feel like she's calling me a racist, this is what I'm going to say. I have a Black, blah, blah, blah. Like, nope. Nope. So that's what I feel like it is.
Yeah. And I like what you said, because it's hard. It's hard to listen and not respond. It is hard.
You have to breathe through that. And that's not just with, someone when you're talking about race, it's anything, right? You have to breathe through that. Having some of these conversations about politics, right? Having some of these conversations that we have about religion. You have to breathe through that because it is so personal to you, right? It is so personal. And so when those things happen, I'm breathing through it. Yep, this feels hard, but I still need to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that willingness to do that, so many more of our leaders need to have that hat on.
Linda, how do you develop it?
The administration has to make equity a priority and have it not be an add-on, something extra that we do, right? It has to be something that is embedded in everything that we do. I've said, I think it was on the first panel, we make teachers write the KUD or a do now, or the I can statements, but all teachers should be taught how, but should have to put up equity objectives. What is your equity objective? How are you making sure that this is accessible, the learning and the content is accessible for all teachers? I think that instructional coaches are a great leverage point, that they should be trained not just to be instructional coaches, but to be equity coaches, so that they learn how to have the conversations about race, so that when they're in there with their peers, they can say, hey, did you know that you interacted with so-and-so 6 times and they were all negative? You interacted with this kid 3 times and they were all positive. And so to be able to reflect some of that back. And I think schools or districts need to adopt one, like I use Glenn Singleton's work with Courageous Conversations. And so people learn how to, not just about what is implicit bias, but now how do we talk about it? Because you have to practice it. It's a skill. It's not just, it's not a talent. right? It's a skill that you have to develop. And and having that listening stance, I say that, the way, unfortunately, a lot of people deal with this, it's RAB, react, attack, breathe. When it needs to be BAR, where you breathe, you acknowledge. So I hear you. This is what I hear you saying, and then you respond. And so we need to learn how to do that and not take it personally. And again, humility and grace are my words for the night. Accept correction with humility and grace.
Yeah. Cassandra, you being a longtime principal, retire from the role, how do you practice humility and grace? How do you have that as an administrator when you're being pulled in 30 different directions and it can seemingly seem equity's not important? Just make sure the kids learn and keep it moving.
Yeah, some days you have sometimes you have that moment where, look, we got test scores to worry about. Let's stay focused. But whatever you do, you have to think of the children first. And if they're in a situation or a school or a classroom in a hallway where it is uncomfortable because of some type of bias or some racial insult or whatever it is, you have to first defend the safety, the emotional safety of that child at all costs. And I would tell my teachers, we can't have any situation where any child or any parent, because we have parents of different races coming in too, where they would feel uncomfortable and think that they're not welcome because of whatever, their race, their religion, or whatever. We have to be accepting of all of them. That was our community. It was so diverse that we didn't have a choice but to recognize these people for who they were and for what experiences that they brought to the school and the community.
Yeah.
It's a hard balance.
Yeah.
And most principals can't do it, or some just like, that's one less, but that's not something on my front burner right now. So I'm gonna leave it back there and hope nothing happens. But you gotta hope. And pray that something's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think I just spoke to a principal yesterday. We were actually talking about self-care, and he was talking about how you have to have a protocol for everything as a principal. Like, you have to figure it out with a protocol. Otherwise, you'll never be able to get anything done. And I'm wondering if the same thing around equity is it built in protocols for you that makes you stop and say, maybe that's not what we should be doing. Maybe we should be doing this.
Yeah, I mean, you see, Fran, how many there are for dealing with behavior, right? Yeah. So like restorative justice circles and all of these different things that are attempting to teach adults how to do exactly that. Stop. Let's get the story. Let's make sure that the kids feel heard so that it isn't just a punishment, so that this behavior, whatever it is, not only does it stop right now, but then the kid learns from it and stops doing it. And I think that that's where so many leaders kind of get lost, is that we're worried about the right now, not understanding that if I put some time and energy into this now, it's going to have bigger benefits. I'm going to reap the rewards, because it's not just going to be the teacher trying to get the kid to do it. It's going to be the kid doing it themselves. Exactly. Because they feel like they're valued. They feel like they're heard. They want to come to the school because it's not this negative place for them that a lot of times it is for kids, for whatever reason, whether it's because of race, whether it's because I'm a girl, whether it's because I'm gay, any of those things that are making it so that when I come here, I can't focus on learning. Yeah, I hear you, but I cannot process what's going on, because as soon as I leave to go to the bathroom, I might get, whatever, or I don't feel like I look around and see anyone who looks like me or understands or hears me. So understanding that if I put some time and energy into this stuff now, I can reap better rewards later, because it won't just be the adults doing it, it'll be kids as well.
Yeah. And I think like these conversations,
and you also have to be aware, but as a leader, you have to be aware of really what's going on in your school. And that means you have to be walk in the hallways, in the classrooms, whatever, and out in the neighborhood. I usually walk the neighborhood, and it was not the safest neighborhood. And sometimes my parents would say, Principal Washington, why are you out here? Well, I'm coming to talk to you all, see what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, tell me what I need to know just in case some stuff is about to pop off.
Yeah, exactly.
So one summer, and I'll make a quick story. One summer, for summer school, our 3rd, 6th, and 8th graders would have to go to school if they didn't have a certain test score. But they would get sent to another school that was in a mile away or so, something like that. So our kids went to a school that was mostly white, but the principal was Black. But our kids were coming back every day on that bus. They were coming back saying, you know, they don't treat us well. They keep talking about those kids. They would get blamed for everything. They told it because it was hurting them. And so my assistant principal and I, we went over to the other school and had to have that talk with that principal and say, look, this is going on in your building. Yeah. And our kids are coming back and they're telling it. And I don't want to have to pull them from here. But we'll find another place for them if this is the case. So he had to have that serious conversation with his teachers who were not people of color.
And just think of how many other kids had that same feeling and interactions with the kids there that never said anything. So the fact that they had a principal and an assistant principal come walking over there saying,
we were like,
no, not our kids.
Not our kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we have to do for our kids.
Wow. And, you know, I guess that leads me to, you know, we've talked about like the theoretical, you know, making sure that you're listening and you have a listening ear, but how do you be like, and I guess we talked about this in the other laws when, you know, someone said the only way for you to be anti-racist is for you need to read. You need to talk to people. You need to read. But is there anything else that you would recommend? Like even Cassandra, you talking about walking around the neighborhood and talking to parents and learning about them. Like what else? Because I know we'll get principals who will inbox me later and say, look, I'm coming from somewhere we didn't talk about race. I don't know but what's on TV or what I've read about. How do you properly equip the principal to be able to have courageous conversations around race and, like Linda says, be uncomfortable but still grow?
I mean, I think the first thing is that the leader has to be willing to have those conversations with themselves. Like when I'm in school right now, and when we're reading these books and, you know, things about being culturally responsive school leaders, everything says that you have to be willing to go through that process yourself first.
Yeah.
And if you are not willing to go through that process yourself first, then I wouldn't even ask anyone else to go through that process. Right. And so, yeah.
Linda, what do you think?
You know, there's it was probably a meme because I'm all about memes, but that said, you know, it said, if you can't say Black Lives Matter, then you shouldn't be in a school. You shouldn't be teaching children. And that's, you know,
that's from the educators room. We said, if you can't say Black Lives Matter, if you can't say Black Lives Matter, then you shouldn't teach Black children or.
Yeah. But you shouldn't be teaching any children, you know, because that, you know, it's so. If people can't look inside and you know, lift up the rock and look at the nasty growth stuff crawling underneath and then move on, you know, it is. I'm getting requests to go in for the beginning of school to do, hey, can you do a implicit bias training for 90 minutes on our first day of school? I want my teachers to feel comfortable talking about race. And I was like, well, I could do that, but they're not going to feel comfortable talking about race, right? I mean, there has to be, there's skills you can learn with your head, but if your heart isn't straight going into it for the right reasons, realizing that you have to lead and have those high expectations for all students, to make sure that your teachers are engaging all students the same way and having the courage to say something when they're not. And I think it's that courage piece that gets lost all the time. As I said earlier, I think there's so many, they're not willing to lose their job or even get reprimanded or give the slightest talking to, even though their job is taking care of the kids, and it's the kids that are suffering. And some people will say, well, we need to wait to tackle this until they're comfortable. It's like, well, how many more generations
They're never going to be comfortable.
are we going to lose? You know, we white people are never going to be comfortable, right? The people with the power don't want to give up the power, and so we got to push it forward or drag my father kicking and screaming along the way.
And sometimes it starts with the kids, you know. If we allow the students to have that discourse, instead of us trying to control everything all the time for fear that it's going to get out of control, they can talk through some things a lot better than the adults sometimes and get their points, get the points across. You know, Black History Month, all we ever learned about, well, I know when I was going to school was, you know, the staple. Martin Luther King.
Washington Carver.
George Washington Carver, Harriet Tubman,
Rosa Parks.
You know, even now
they fixed everything, right? Didn't they fix everything? Yeah.
Right. And how many years ago was that? Because we're still talking about the same stuff instead of looking at, you know, Black inventors and other things and the same with, you know, the same with Hispanic Heritage Month. So we talk, let's celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Come on, people.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, we're on here and we've learned and we're using this, but for so many more people, they're like, I'm just not. They haven't reached a point where they're willing to be uncomfortable, and they'll never be uncomfortable, like you said, Linda, until they just do it, right? Switching gears now to thinking about, you know, you're a principal, you're responsible for instruction, and you have decided this year, I'm going to teach my teachers how to be anti-racist. I don't know everything. I'm going to bring in some consultants. We're going to do a book study because everybody loves a book study. And I am going to look at the data on how our Black, brown children perform, and I'm going to talk to teachers about it. Is it that simple?
No.
But that sounds like a good start.
It's the plan.
I'll take it.
It's the plan.
So give us the plan. Give us what should happen. What should we do? What should an administrator do? They're open, they're willing, they're learning. How do they go in day one and address a teacher who they know is harming students from a race perspective? They are, you know, just not the friendliest. They don't care to teach a certain group of kids. How do you even get ready to change the heart or mind of a teacher like that?
I mean, I think one of the first things you can do is reaching out to the kids and the families to get some of their concrete stories about their experiences. And I would share those with the teacher without names, right? So that there's no retaliation, but like giving them, here's how you've made kids feel. Whether that was your intention or not, right? Let's put intention to the side. Absolutely. Here is how kids in your class have felt during their interactions with you. Is this okay? Is this what you want to have kids feeling? Because I think that so much of it, I don't think that a vast majority of our teachers are going into the classrooms and saying, I'm going to intentionally, make sure that these kids feel. I don't think that. I think that teachers have had to go through so much, right, with the accountability and, am I going to have a job and all of this, that their hearts are a little bit hardened. And I get it. But so I think that giving some of those concrete stories to say, here's what's happening. And what are we going to do to fix it? How can I, as your leader, support you with this? Is a really good first start. And it also validates and could offer some support to those kids and families to say, okay, no, I do want to hear you. Yeah. I do want to get your story and share that so that we can start to address this.
I think we have to attack it on two levels. That level, this level, is the interpersonal piece, right? But if you're going to hire a consultant, have them come out and sit with you with the student teacher parent handbook. Because I can sit there, we talked before we turned live about dress code. There are so many policies and procedures that are systemically racist or that are proving detrimental to only the kids of color. And dress code is one area that it is based on a white norm. Attendance policies. I was talking with a district that if you have 16 absences, you lose credit. I said, well, what if you can pass the final? It doesn't matter. And then there's something way off, right? Because if you can complete everything, you're equating learning to seat time. And if you have two working parents and you're the oldest sibling, and if a kid is sick, maybe you're the one that has to stay home, right? I mean, there's just so many other reasons that absentee policies affect kids of color more than the white kids. Dress codes are not only inherently on a white norm, but the uniforms themselves are made for white bodies. They're uncomfortable for most kids. So I think if a leader needs to attack it from both of those places. You really need to look to be a true anti-racist, right? It's a structural, it's a systemic issue. It's not just an interpersonal issue, and start chipping away at this systemic racism that's in your building.
And you brought up a point, because we just talked about this when we were we were offline, and there are, in the midst of COVID and everything that's happening, there have been school districts who have said that kids, in order for them to learn, they have to be in their uniform. Even at home while they're virtually learning, they have to be in their uniform. And we talked about this, and that's a policy that as an administrator, I probably would not enforce, because to me, it is putting how you appear over what you learn, right? So, when you're talking about that, Linda, what do you do in those situations where it's like you have a policy, it's not equitable? What do you do?
Yeah, you have to. Well, like you said, I probably would not enforce it, but you have to have the courage. You have to talk to your superiors, right? You have to go and you have to say, look, let's look at this with an eye towards equity, and especially, that whoever made up that policy is sitting in a meeting with a dress shirt and shorts on Zoom, right? And so it's so hypocritical. And I steal from Gloria Ladson Billings all the time, because why not? She's a goddess. But I heard her speak to a group of kids once, and she said, let me tell you, there's no research that connects a dress code to academic achievement. It's for the adults. It's not for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you have a school, you're in a school, and despite the race or whatever, let's talk poverty. If your school is 80%, 90% poverty level, and you may have, my school had a 40% mobility rate and a 30% homeless rate. What is it? How does that make me look to say, well, you have to have on your uniform, when they may not even have a place to sleep at night? They don't have any food. They don't have money for the laundromat. So we have to have a washing machine and dryer at the school. Things like that. So of course I would say, oh no, I just need you in front of that computer. If you can get in front of that computer, or the 2 days a week that you're supposed to be in the school, come to school. I don't care if you have on jeans. I don't care what you have on. Just make sure you make it here.
Whew. I want to ask you guys, we've talked about some policies. I want to talk about when you know it's not going to work. As an administrator, you have a teacher in your building, or just an educator, doesn't have to be a teacher. And you are saying, you know what, they do not get it. They are not anti-racist. They are harming kids. How do you make that teacher feel uncomfortable enough to leave? And I want to be clear, because this is anti-racist, because we'll get pushback and people will say, you know, how dare you talk about a teacher not having a job? But I'm talking about those cases where it's very clear that this is not the place for you. How do you handle that with care? Because as soon as you say the R word, people get defensive, and there's no more listening at that point.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've seen is that there has been a lot of times a direct correlation between teachers who are like that and how prepared they are for their classrooms, or how well they are actually doing the things that we've asked them, expected them to do. Because a lot of times it's a mindset thing, right? So it's, if I don't feel like you're worthy of me going home and putting in extra work, or going home and looking over my lesson plan and doing all those things, and I'm not going to do that because you don't care anyway, right? So I found that there's a direct correlation a lot of times between that. And so use that, right? Like, so we're going to talk about lesson plans not being done. We're going to talk about you not being prepared for your lesson. We're going to talk about all those things. And I'm also going to mention equity, but if I need to, it's going to be around the professionalism stuff that is enough to say this isn't the place for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you almost have to do that.
Yeah.
With the professional part of it, saying the lesson plans, the classroom management, those type of things, the data. You know, I'm looking at your data and I'm not seeing movement. You have to follow the protocol and the policies. Otherwise, it's not going to stick, especially if you have a very strong union.
Yeah. And you're in Chicago. And you're in Chicago, so you're
that is saying your races is not going to stick at all, because you're not going to win that. You're not going to win that battle.
Wow.
And if I could get you to do all those other things, like getting your lesson plan in on time and actually looking through the lesson and dealing and not sending kids out for things like that, even if you don't believe they deserve it, but you're doing it, right? You are doing it. That's what I care about right now.
I can't change the way somebody thinks.
Exactly. Maybe later on down the road, you'll have your epiphany and realize that Black lives and other lives do matter. But for right now, you are going to do what you're supposed to do for the kids.
Yeah.
Here, at least.
Yeah.
And I guess my question becomes, can you change the heart of a teacher who you suspect has some feelings about children? Can you change their heart? Like, is there anything you can do to get them to come to the anti-racist side?
It depends.
Yeah.
Depends on the person, depends on their life experiences and their beliefs. Because you think about racism, it is all about your beliefs. So can I change your belief? You know, not so much can I change your mind, can I change your heart? Like you said, can I change your heart? I think sometimes it's harder to change that heart than it is that mind. So, I mean, that's when you have to get to the emotional core of somebody. And depending on how far they're going to let you in to change that heart, especially when you're coming from a professional level, it might be a hard wall to break.
Yeah. Can I also say, too, that right now, in the middle of this pandemic and in the middle of all this racial tension, I'm not trying to change your mind and heart. If I'm being honest, I don't have the energy to try and do that with you. But what I will do is make sure that the kids that are in front of you feel like they deserve better. Because if they feel it, then they're going to talk more about what they're experiencing. Hopefully moms and dads and aunties and aunts will hear more about it instead of you internalizing it. So I feel like right now for me, I'm more concerned about making sure that the kids and the families feel that love and that value, rather than trying to change the hearts and minds of people that are just obviously not going to get it right now.
Right.
And if you don't get it after all of this,
Right.
Yeah. And you never will.
Right.
So.
And I think it's important that you brought up the pandemic, because for a lot of people, things like this have taken. We have even more racial unrest, and companies pledging that indeed Black Lives Matter. What if you were the administrator over your dream school and you were working with kids and you had the chance to build a truly anti-racist school, like from the bottom to the top? What are some things that you would do? I know it's like a easy but hard one.
Yeah, I know.
Are we doing this in our basement, Fran? Are we?
No, right.
Whatever confines
one
that
room
you
classroom.
have, whatever your confines are, you might say, listen, I'm going to start my own school at my house, but I'm really talking about the regular public school.
I think one of the first, and I'll just name one thing in my perfect school that is anti-racist. I would have a large diversity of teachers in front of kids, right? So I would have Black male teachers. I would have female teachers. I would have teachers who are Muslim. I would have teachers that when you look at this school, you think, wow, is that the United Nations? Like, what is going on over there? Because that is so important. It's important to see that representation. It's important that as I'm walking down the halls, I see people who not only look like me, but look different than what I see on the normal, so that it opens my possibilities of, oh, wow, okay, let me go and spark up a conversation. Or you're going to hear about, the prayer and things like that you may not have ever even thought about. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Diverse staff and diversity in the student population also. And hopefully enough funding to do all those things that you need to do.
The biggest thing.
Yeah.
The resources and having, I would also say doing things with, project-based learning, experiential learning.
Agreed.
Not necessarily focusing on textbooks.
Yep.
That don't necessarily represent all of us anyway, whether we're women, people of color, gender biases and things like that. So let's be creative and let's meet those different learning styles of students. So it's just not a read-write situation. If we only had that dream and the money, we could do some wonderful things.
Right. So if anyone's listening who has
the money.
In addition to those, this is, and I know Fran read the article that I put out there, but this is the opportunity to really revamp what we think education should be, right? Because even if when the pandemic is over and people are going back to schools, they're going to try and go back to the way it was before the pandemic, and it sucked. And so we were going to have kids coming in at all these different levels who had completely different academic experiences. And we're going to try and put them in these age groups again, which are arbitrary, and so in my ideal world, it's not 188 days and then boom, all of a sudden you get to move on to the next level. Right. It's here are the objectives, here are the skills and knowledge to learn. And if you can do it in a week, good for you. And we're going to move you. We're going to keep moving you. And we're going to keep moving the cohort of kids that you're with. And you're always going to be working at your level. And it's always going to be individualized. And it's always going to be project-based. And we're going to, I think we really, as technology allows us to individualize learning more than we ever have before. And we really need to leverage that with the person to person, but we can be using technology so much better to address every kid's needs and areas of strength.
Yep, agreed.
And get rid of the standardized testing.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is very biased.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our students. So we would make some companies mad, but it would work for us.
Yeah.
And so, knowing what your ideal school looks like, somebody said on here, it exists in schools. I had a meeting, and I'm going to cover your faces, Rolandria and Linda, as I read this.
Okay.
It exists in school. I had a meeting with teachers to discuss directly the issue of using the word violent to describe Black boys. In fact, a white teacher came to me and asked me to help. I opened the door to discuss where those mindsets came from, and I could tell that one white teacher did not feel comfortable because she could not understand how her place of privilege led to this problem. I went on to specifically state what the protocol would be and the language used to address, I'm assuming, children. That's a hard one, right? Because I've been in schools where the majority of teachers are African American and kids are referred to as violent and don't want to learn and lazy, and and so you have to have these conversations with people who look like them, and it's disheartening, right? How do you manage that?
Breathe through it. Because honestly, because it's so triggering, because I've had that experience. I've had even as young as 18 months when my son was in daycare, a daycare teacher trying to tell me that my son was aggressive. And I'm like, while we're sitting here having this conversation, you have had to get up 3 times and stop the girls from hitting each other.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this, because that's not my experience with him. And so it is very triggering, because we see the end results, right? We see the George Floyd situations where someone in their mind thought that he was dangerous. And because of that, he is now not here anymore. So getting people to understand that you have to breathe through it, because it is infuriating. Or my thing is that the teachers who say that parents don't care. It is infuriating to me, because you cannot tell me I carried my son for 10 months that I don't care about my child. It's dehumanizing. Don't say that. But it is one of those things where you do. But I think the biggest thing is challenging it, because it is something that is said so often and so flippantly that it becomes true, and it's not. So addressing it, I think, is the first step. Tell me more about why you feel like he's violent.
Yep.
What happened before, during, and after? Let's talk about this. Because that's not the case. A lot of times it's just taken as fact. Oh, okay. Like, nope.
Yeah.
Right.
And
define violent. Define that for me. What did you see in here that makes you describe this young person as violent? Because if you start describing his as violent now, because then you're going to go in the teacher's lounge.
Yeah.
And you're going to talk about how violent he is, or she is. But it's not, because some girls too, they'll call the girls the same thing. So what happened in your classroom that chaos just happens? What sparked all of this? Everybody gets due process. That's what I used to tell those teachers. There's 3 sides to the story. His side, their side, the truth in there somewhere. Let's figure this out. And why aren't you suspending this kid? Everyone doesn't deserve suspension.
Yeah. And I like how you say, define violent. What does that mean? Because it makes people reflect, right? And it goes through.
Yeah.
And so, when we're talking about this, and, we're saying that, you breathe through it, you talk through it, you ask questions. What do you have to do? How do you develop that listening and that pausing? Like, because so many new administrators, they don't get that in training. They don't know to pause and say, well, let's think about this. How do you develop that? Or is it just through fire?
It's definitely through research too. One of my favorite go-tos is the Art of Coaching, or the Art of Coaching Teams. And in that, she has coaching stems. And so when I, got that resource, I've shared it with so many different people. So when you're coaching someone, pick a couple of these and latch onto them. Any of the people that I work with will tell you, Rolandria's is tell me more, right? Tell me more about that, friend. Tell me more about what happened, right? Because I do want to know, and I am going to probe you, and I'm going to do it in love. But you're not just going to be able to just say parents don't care. Tell me more about why you say that. let's dig into that. Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
choosing a couple of those that like those become like your go-to when you're having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, the probing does work, and it does help. And you have those little question stems, but I also had some very good mentors. Even when I was an assistant principal and the principals that I worked for, you know, you live and you learn how to handle certain situations. One of my bosses, when I was an assistant principal, and we're still very good friends, even when she was talking, when the kids would come in and, you know, was, well, he said, I said, she always said, start your sentence with I. I did such and such, and then this happened.
Yeah.
And that changes the whole dynamic of,
Wow.
like that.
well, he was
I like
acting
that a lot.
Well, start with I, and then we'll move forward on with this story. And then just learning patience, you know, okay, everybody, like I said, everyone has due process. It's hard for teachers to, you know.
It's very hard. It's very hard.
This is like, you don't believe me, I'm the adult. No, it's not that I don't believe you.
Yeah, but we have to
you know, everyone has something to say, and everyone sees it from a different point of view. So let's work through it. And a lot of times people were mad because they thought I wasn't listening, but I needed to hear the whole story before I, you know, put down whatever discipline I had to put down.
Yeah. You know, we're about to start school, and many of us are starting face to face, while others we have been fortunate to start virtual. In a virtual environment, how do you continue the work of being anti-racist as an administrator? What do you do? How do you do that?
I mean, I think one of the things you have to do is, especially virtually, is you have to be in the virtual class meetings to see what's being said. What is the teacher focusing on? So I mean, like going back to the uniform example. So the school leader may have given that edict that, you know, listen, as long as they're there, that's what we care about. But unless you get on that teacher's Zoom or whatever it is to see, are they focusing on having kids sit up, and are you in the right uniform and things like that? Or are they focusing on the instruction? So that's one of the things you have to be there to see.
So you just can't go as an administrator, which many teachers, you know, as a teacher, I thought my administrators were chilling in the office. I didn't know the work that they did when I was a new teacher. So, you know, spelling that myth that administrators are just there and not doing anything, you know, you have to actually do that.
Yeah, and you know, you're still having meetings, right? If they're taking place over Zoom or whatever, and you know, with it is still possible to do some really powerful professional learning, regardless of the topic, you know, through a virtual format. So just because, well, we're not meeting anymore, we're not going to talk about equity. You know, you can still be doing everything you had planned before. You can still be doing it through the virtual platform. I think the other thing is that I think leaders really need to be diligent in looking and, you know, taking some dipsticks of lessons that the teachers are doing, that they are actually accessible for all the kids. You know, I've seen lesson plans that are say things, you know, there was a pre-K lesson that said, all right, go and round up all of your dinosaur toys and then do X, Y, or Z. I'm like, you're assuming that they have dinosaur toys. Like it couldn't have been your favorite toys or a collection of toys. It was specifically around dinosaurs. And, you know, so that the teachers are doing their best, without a doubt, with the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
But they are not necessarily looking at every piece with an equity lens. And somebody really has to dig in to make sure that the lessons that they're giving are accessible to everybody, regardless of socioeconomic level, culture, or access to technology.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that Megan just asked is, hey Megan, Megan said, I'm conflicted about leaving my current school due to the lack of diversity. How can I push my admin to hire a more diverse staff? That's a big one. How do we do that? Because I was, you know, yeah, how do we do that?
I mean, I would say one of the things that Megan could do is if she has friends who are diverse, who are in education, that she could, you know, co-sign with her admin to say, like, this is a really great person. Because if they don't already have it, that's probably intentional.
Yeah.
meaning they're not going to go and look for it, right? And we already
Right.
know, as people of color, how often our resumes are pushed to the side just based on name alone, right? And so if she has people that she knows that are good teachers and staff that could be a part of her school, like, you know, bringing them in that way.
Yeah, that's probably the first and best way to do it, and just start forward those resumes to your administrator. Don't just tell them, oh, I have this friend. You talk to that friend and say, I need your resume so I can hand it to my email it or hand it to my principal. You have to be vocal about it. If you don't see that push, you have to step up. And if there are other people in the school who feel the same way, letting them know to let the principal know. Some people who are ready to jump in there. They have the experience, they have the education, and they would make the school a better place.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of administrators will say, well, we just can't find any. I worked on our it's a problematic title, but it's minority teacher recruitment for the state this past year, and so many districts, well, they're just not applying. There aren't any. They're not out there. It's like we have 700 people who self-identify as people of color who are certified, who are not working. And it's not just that they're not getting hired, but once they're hired, they're going into really hostile environments, and so they're not staying. So a lot of it isn't even just how hard it is to hire, but you have to create an environment. You have to create the accepting and the anti-racist climate in order to keep people.
Right.
Agreed.
Right.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we wouldn't get people to apply. My school was very far north and on the north side of Chicago. And Chicago's a very segregated city in a lot of ways. So a lot of our Hispanic, Latino and African American teachers lived on the opposite end of the city. So they wouldn't apply. So then I would get on the phone sometimes and call principals that I knew from different parts of the city and say, hey, do you have any resumes of people, are you losing teachers based on the budget that are looking for a job? And that's how we would get some people, but they didn't want to do that drive. And I'd have to say, look, we need you, I have all these children here and they need to see people that look like you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess, Salem says, Selwyn, try having your school do a school pairing program. Encourage your admin to share experiences that exist in both institutions. And Megan says, I need more teacher friends. I keep saying this, that one Friday, we're just going to have a virtual happy hour and we're just going to have like teacher talk. Before we go, because I think it's important for us as we go into this series, we're ending the series on anti-racism, but it's not ending, it's going to morph into something else. But I'm curious around 2020, we're about to start school. We know we're starting virtually. You've already talked about what your dream school looks like. On our way out, I want you to talk about what is the biggest hindrance to administrators not developing that equity eye. What's the one thing they need to like as an administrator, what is my blind spot and how do I correct that? And that's what we're going to end on.
I'll start.
Okay.
And it may not be the right answer, but it's what I'm thinking right now.
I got you.
The load is so heavy for administrators. There's so many fires you're putting out. There's just, and now with the pandemic, I'm telling you, their mind is on how do I make this work with whether it's going to be a blended learning, whatever it's going to be with my district. Right. That equity piece is not their priority right now. Now, maybe when some things calm down, we can say, okay, let's focus on equity. Because right now they're focusing on how am I going to make sure my kids are getting the best learning environment that we can possibly bring them during this pandemic. Before that, I would say, before the pandemic, I would say that it probably was that it just wasn't in the forefront because there's still so many other things that you're worried about. Unless the district says we're going to focus on this, or unless you just have one of those type of principals who is just this innovative thinker saying we have to do this and we're going to do it now, but still that principal's going to need to buy in from the staff to actually put it as a priority for that year. Mm-hmm. And not just a year, it should be ongoing.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things, in addition to what Cassandra said, is fear of backlash. And I think that one of the ways that you can counter that is by finding allies. Right. So finding people either both in the school and outside the school that you can talk to about this, but will also be spreading the same message as you, so that when it gets tough, when you're doing that introspective work yourself, and when you're about to have those conversations with teachers or encourage them to have those conversations and you're afraid of the backlash, you have those people to help to encourage you and keep you going and to help you remember your North Star, which should always be that each of your kids is getting what they need in order to be able to learn and grow. So.
Absolutely.
I do think that right now, like Cassandra said, it's bandwidth is so limited with so many stressors. And, the people who are making decisions about whether to go face-to-face or virtual are feeling the weight of their kids' lives, on them with those decisions. So I think that now's the time to find in those like-minded people, the teachers in your building, and turn it over to them, right? Because you have to do all of the other making sure the buses are running on time and taking care of all of that stuff, and you don't want this to get lost. And so create an equity committee and find the people who are interested and have them volunteer and have them work and set them, bottom up innovation, top down facilitation. Let them come up with what they want to do and you clear the path for them. But allow them to lead. And as we said before, the kids, especially in secondary, be that middle school or high school, they're ready. They are ready and capable of leading. They may need somebody to set parameters for them, but boy, they're ready to tackle this too. So I think that creating that equity team and clearing the path for them to let them get the work going.
Yeah. And, as we end this series tonight, there's a couple of things I want to make sure all three of these awesome educators are here at your service. Anybody who's been on the show for the last 8 weeks, please reach out to them. Guys, put your information in the chat box so people can get to it. And just know that these conversations are ongoing. You don't become anti-racist by going to a training. It takes years of work. Someone said in the first chat, they said you can't buy anti-racism. Like, it's not something you can package and buy and all of a sudden, darn, I'm not racist anymore. But as we go into August and we go into the school year, we will be bringing more Friday conversations around different topics. And we're going to hit on virtual learning very soon. We're going to talk about virtual learning and what does that look like. We're going to continue some talking about anti-racism and also self-care. Tomorrow, guys, if you have not done this, Linda, how did I forget? Tomorrow is the day of teacher self-care. It is our first event from the school year, of this new school year. And we have a day just full of teacher self-care. And so we have 15 sessions. We have 200 people registered. So if you are coming, if you want to be a part of that, we encourage you to come on and come, and I will put the link for tickets. It's going to be fabulous. We have some great topics, and we have some anti-racist topics, but we also have the majority of topics are around mental health.
Yeah.
In addition, tell everybody very quickly, go around, tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh Lord, I don't even know if I know my Instagram name. It's Queen Just _Ice. But all you're gonna see is a bunch of family pictures. But my kids are cute, so please.
So I'm Gen X, and I don't get Instagram, but I am on Twitter at Linda T. Darcy, and my website is up, and that's lindatdarcy.com.
Absolutely.
And my website is Teach and Take Time for You, and that's the number 4. Teach and Take Time for You, and it's the same. I think it's the same for Twitter. It's definitely, it's hard to start remembering all that stuff.
Yes.
Right. Instagram, it is the same.
I gotta step my game up. All you guys have your own websites and stuff.
It's just more
I know
to
what
do.
I'm doing this weekend.
It's more. It ends up more to do, girl.
Yeah. And so, guys, reach out to them. And remember, these conversations, I'm going to start drinking wine during these conversations, but we have to start to have these because these are important from other educators. So we thank you. We'll see you tomorrow, the day of Teacher Self-Care. If you haven't already, grab your tickets. I need to shut off registration, but I've been lazy today, so I have not done that. And then join us next Friday. Next Friday, I don't even know what we're going to talk about. So you guys should inbox me and say, this is what we want to talk about, and I will find people for it. So thank you guys. We appreciate it. And everybody have a great night.
Good night. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.